Hi, folks. Whoa, what was that opening intro song? I like that. Well, good afternoon. A pleasure to be back and see some familiar faces. So as David mentioned, going to walk through a little bit. Last year was kind of a fireside chat, pretty informal, and there was a lot of requests to see sort of the codified story of how this stuff works. And then also some questions about how this can apply to other functions. We did that quite a bit at HubSpot. I've seen it throughout the tech industry, so I'll share some of those stories. So one of the unique elements of the story that David shared was HubSpot was actually my first sales job. I started my career writing code. I have an engineering background, did the MIT thing. So my whole professional life was really this lens of data and science and technology. And I think in our presentation today, you'll see that lens come to life, as that's really how I thought about building up the sales org. So this is our journey today. As David New says, we're going to go from hire to retire. I love that, that model. And we're going to start on the hiring side with a very scary question, important question. And I'll tell you why it's kind of a scary question. I'm going to go back to the 9th hire I made at HubSpot. I had convinced the #1 salesperson from an 800-person sales team to come and join our company. We were 15 people in a garage, and they agreed to come. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And I rolled out the red carpet, and I just said, please, teach us to sell. And I was amazed that they didn't crush it. I was like, how could this person, #1 out of 900 people, and they come in and they do mediocre? 15 people in a garage? And I thought about it, and I realized, wow, the context that they're coming from is so different than what HubSpot was at that time. They were coming from a company literally running Super Bowl ads. Within 1 minute of conversation, the buyer knew what we were going to be talking about. And within 15 minutes, we had a decision. That was the exact opposite of what selling was like at HubSpot at that time. And you can imagine that the type of salesperson that would perform in those two different contexts would be very different. So I realized at that moment, there is no right answer to that question. The ideal sales hiring formula person is unique to the context, but there is a process to engineer it. And that's what we're going to start off talking about and see if this process can be applied to other functions as well. So what I essentially did was I took a step back and said, okay, what are the 10 criteria that I think will correlate with our context? And this is very hacky from 12 years ago. We literally put it in Excel and documented, what do I mean by passion? What do I mean by, intelligence? And what would a score of a 3, 5, 7, 10 sound like? And we were very disciplined about scoring all of our candidates against that, and especially our hires. And it was very interesting, even for the folks in the room coming from small businesses, if you only hire 4 people in a year, to just ask yourself, why is Mary awesome and why is Bob mediocre? And are we looking for this stuff in our hiring process? And maybe can we tweak on this? And it gets really interesting when I started hiring 40 or 50 salespeople a year to start to put some nice regression analysis against it and do these sort of iterations every 6 months. So this was actually the result of the first regression analysis that I did. It wasn't the end story, and I'll tell you what the end result was. And what was cool about this is when we think about like car salespeople, and think about like how we generalize sales, convincing, objection handling, closing ability, those were the negatively correlated to success. And you think about like a great consultant, preparation, domain experience, intelligence, that was the stuff that was actually meaningful. So this really redirected my entire interview process. And it was actually the first statistical evidence that I saw that showed that, maybe today's buyer is expecting something a little different from what we expect of salespeople today. Okay? And so let me just do a quick survey. I'll tell you the 5 that worked for us. All 3 of these were in the top 5. Guess which one was #1? How many think it was intelligence was the highest correlated? Come on, we're not that dumb as a function. All right, how many think it was coachability? How about curiosity? Every audience is the same. It was coachability. I think you folks barely nailed it, but curiosity was a close second. And what was really cool about that was coachability wasn't even my first theory of 10. It took 18 months of that iterative process and be like, what's the pattern here? And it was the people who had tons of experience in sales and came in here and was like, Mark, thanks for the coaching, but I've been selling forever. I know how to do this. And they locked themselves in a closet and didn't work out. And so that was a huge driver of our process. Now, applying that to other functions, if we try to abstract this out for a second, what's really going on here? What's really going on is sales as a function is arguably the most quantifiable. Right? Success and failure is the most quantifiable, and that's what enables a process like this, is I have a quantifiable result 6 months, 12 months later, and I can extract that back to my interview. So for this to work to other functions, we have to find that same quantifiable dimension, and I think there's evidence that we're starting to see this. I know a ton of marketing teams we put our marketers on a revenue quota at HubSpot. Right, here's a budget, here's some time, generate a bunch of leads with content, and we're going to measure how much revenue comes from that. Whoa. Our engineers, they'd work in small teams of 2 or 3 people and build different features. We could measure whether people use it and how many. 27% use it in the first 4 months, 37% use the feature 7 months later. Right? Customer success, our support team, we ran an NPS on all the callers after they hung up, and 7% would take the NPS score, and we get an NPS score per customer support person. And customer success, that's easy. I mean, that's the revenue retention and upgrades of the people in their install base. So whatever it is, thanks to the help of TINYpulse and to BI as a general discipline, we can quantify these other functions. And if we're willing to do that, we can start applying some of this predictable hiring to the process by simply quantifying what those goals are, developing the interview scorecard or methodology as I did, and now we've got a nice little checkpoint, sort of a test, learn, iterate function to see 6 months later, are we interviewing for the right stuff? Right, so can it apply elsewhere? I don't know, I think so. Let's move on to onboarding. So I mentioned it was my first sales role, and during the first year, I interviewed 30 VPs of sales to ask them how the heck this stuff works. And that was partially a frustrating experience and partially an exciting experience. And I don't mean to sound egotistical, but I was just amazed at like how little process was used in this field that was so critical to companies. One of the questions I asked them was like, how do you train your salespeople? How do you train your salespeople? And most everyone said they used a ride-along, right? Hey, John, welcome to the company. You remember Susan? She's our #1 rep. You're going to ride with her for a week or sit next to her for a week, and that's your training. And that did not feel predictable or scalable to me. That felt scary. And as I looked at my sales team, I was like, my top sales reps, they get there in different ways. Like Jen is a real person. Jen was a top performer. She was amazing at rapport building. All her prospects loved her. The first half an hour of the conversation was the kids, the weather, the church, the sports teams, the cats, whatever. They all bought from her. She was kind of mediocre at the rest of the process, but she is so good at rapport building. Then I had Adam, an activity hound. 40% more calls than anyone else on the floor. Every time I went over to his desk, he had like 9 Salesforce.com tabs open. He's on the phone, he's writing emails. Craziness. Again, not very good at the rest of the process. But he had so much activity, he crushed it. Imagine if Jen trained Adam or Adam trained Jen. What a mess, right? So it's like just very unpredictable. I mean, the spreading of bad habits, the fact that Jen would have had a totally different perception of what best practice was. The fact that Adam can't communicate what he does because he's not a manager, right? So something was really unsettling with that. So I took a step back and created a playbook, gave the reps enough room to add their own personalization, and then layered on top of it really detailed certifications, right, on skills. Where possible, I used exams, and I was able to quantify the output from training. So all of a sudden, we had this sort of 30-day checkpoint on the hiring. It's like, okay, you hired Bob. He got an F- on his tests. Like, well, I didn't have to wait 6 to 9 months to know that we've got a hiring manager interview problem. Or maybe the assessment's wrong. But at least I've got a checkpoint, and then I've got another checkpoint 6 months later when Bob either turns out to be good or not. If Bob gets an F- on his training and then ends up being #1 rep, we've got a problem in our training department, right? If those things don't correlate. Fortunately, that was the best predictor, was when I looked at every hiring manager's score in the interview, and I looked at the training score correlated to success twice as much as any of the interviewing. So I was happy to see that we're on the right track, and we were set ourselves up for an iterate, learn within that methodology. Okay. Now, how to apply that to other functions? We actually did the HubSpot. The key here is matching the role with the skill set. Right? So I was the first one to scale up a lot of bodies at the company, and then Halligan, our CEO, was just like, hey, head of engineering, hey, head of marketing, as you scale up, just copy what Mark did. So they all came over and like, hey, can I borrow those certifications? And so this is kind of what we ended up here, was a whole bunch of certifications around the knowledge people had to learn about in training, from product to the sales process to the buyer to how we onboarded customers to the architecture of our product. And you can see we had advanced or basic or not applicable for each role. And so now we've got this training function with each of these functions that's highly predictable and scalable. Okay, my favorite, develop. So sales managers. I don't know. The frontline sales manager, in my opinion, is the most important role at the company and the biggest driver of revenue success outside of hiring. And I see it executed so poorly, in my opinion. I see sales managers that are doing the job for the reps, and they get lazy and lose confidence. And I see sales managers that spend all day using fear-based motivation tactics, doing pipeline reviews, stuff that like technology can do. Where's the coaching? That's the biggest driver. And so I want to give you an analogy of what good coaching is. I've been trying to learn golf for like 15 years, and I've taken a lot of lessons. And one golf pro, he's like, all right, Mark, take a swing. And I did. And he's like, okay, turn your grip over, lean back in your stance more, right foot more than left foot, think 1 o'clock, not 2 o'clock on your backswing, and give me more wrist on contact. And I was like, what? You gotta be kidding me. And so then another golf pro said, all right, Mark, take a swing. And I did. He's just like, okay, just turn your grip over a little bit. Now take 100 swings. So 20 minutes later, he's like, how's that feel? I'm like, wow, I think I'm getting this. He's like, now lean back in your stance. Take another 100 swings. Such a simple example. But I've promoted 20 reps to manager. They all took the first golf pro approach. They get a rep out of training, they see the 90 things that are broken with them, and they throw up on them for an hour with feedback. And you can just see the rep's head spinning and nothing gets done. Right? But as they mature as a coach, they actually can see the 90 things, but they see the 1 or 2 that'll make the biggest impact. And they focus the coaching there in a very personalized way that's customized to that feedback and customized to the learning style of the rep. And I call that data-driven sales coaching, when they use the data to diagnose the skill deficiency and then customize the coaching plan. So let's take a look. 2:45 in the afternoon, oh my gosh. Charts. It's not as scary as it looks. So what we have here is the different colors are different reps on a team. We got 5 reps here. And we just have a basic funnel at the very top. How many leads did they create? How many leads did they call? How many demos came from those leads? How many customers did they close? And what was the conversion rate between each? So look at the guy at the top, the purple guy. What's his problem? If I didn't have the data, that manager would say to me, he's got to make more calls. That's what they always say. Not the case. He's leading the team in leads created, almost leading the team in calls. His problem is he's terrible at getting those calls to demos and almost as bad at getting those demos to customers. We've got some serious problems here. He's the worst on the team. So I like to start as high up as possible in fixing this. So let's focus on that that work lead to demo percentage. And my first question is, can I learn more from the data? In this case, yes, I can. Right, so work lead to demo rate. It could be that they're working tons of leads and not getting anyone on the phone, or he could be finding that it's just everyone hangs up on him. I can figure that out in the data. That's important because my coaching is way different. If he's getting everyone, he's making a bunch of calls and not getting on the phone, I got to look at what he's saying on the voicemails, is he customizing his emails? But if he's getting people on the phone and they're hanging up on him, that's fine. I guess look, is he breaking the ice fine? Is he building trust? Like, why are people hanging up on him? So there's an example of data-driven coaching. So how do I hold an organization of 400 people or thousands of people that you folks have to this coaching culture? Here's how I did it. On the second afternoon of every month, I met with my directors. Each director had 50 reps under them, 5 managers and 50 reps. And I just said, let's go, 90 minutes, each rep. We have a 90-minute meeting. We're going to, each rep, you're going to tell me, what are you coaching the rep on? How'd you come up with that? And how are you going to coach them? Right? And because that meeting was in the books, of course, the directors met with the managers that morning. And of course, the managers met with all the reps and reviewed their data the day before. Everyone was accountable to creating this information. And that meeting between the manager and the rep was not, hey, John, I looked at your data, and here's what's wrong with you, and here's how we're going to fix it. There's no buy-in there. That meeting was very much like, hey, John, great month last month, 120%, nice job. You know what we do in this meeting. First thing I want to hear is, how'd you do qualitatively? How'd you do? What do you think you did well? What do you think you could have improved on? And now we're going to go through all the numbers. Here's the call volume. You're number 2 in the company. Whoa, what are you doing? That's awesome. How do you do that? And oh, here's the number of demos. Whoa, you're at the bottom 25%. What's going on there? Right, so we have a dialogue. And now based on your qualitative and quantitative observations, where do you want my help this month? And how can I help you? Okay, sense of urgency development in your opportunities. Great. What should we do? You'll show up great with let's do 2 film reviews. Record 2 of your sales calls, and let's listen to them and look at them from the lens of sense of urgency development. That sounds beautiful. Let's schedule it in our calendar right now. It's the first day of the month. We're both free next Tuesday at 3 o'clock and the following Wednesday at 9 a.m. Let's get those booked. So the first day of the month, my managers walk out of that day with all of their coaching booked for the month, with every single rep, and it's honed in on a precise skill that I think will move the needle. Okay? It's a really nice situation. So here's what that looks like, just the rep, the diagnosis, the coaching plan metric. Now what's the metrics on how to improve it, which is important. And now I have a paper trail every single month. So now I'm sitting down in September with Mary, or let's say Bob. Bob is John's manager. Bob, it's September. You've been telling me that John's got a sense of urgency problem for 4 months now. What is going on here? You hired John. You loved John. And now you can't improve his sense of urgency after 4 months? My mentor used to say to me, you got to be able to tell these managers, go in the bathroom, look in the mirror, and ask yourself, are you a bad recruiter or are you a bad coach? Because you messed up somewhere. Now, he's a little extreme. I don't really manage that way. But I think it's a good point on accountability here. And had we not had the metrics and not had the paper trail, this gets pretty interesting that, hey, you're a manager. This is your job. Hire good people and coach them. And I've got a nice monthly data check on it. Now, how did we enable that? And how do we apply that to other functions? What's really going on there, if we abstract this out, is we were able to understand the leading indicators towards success. Okay, so success in sales, revenue production, my quota. Leading indicators, dials, demos, meetings. That's clear. Can we apply that to other functions? And I've seen it done. Marketing, right? Okay, I get it. Revenue from your leads. Can we look at the content, quality, and quantity of the pieces you're creating? Right? Customer success, that's an easy one. It's very much like a sales job. You're supposed to retain customers and upgrade them. How many calls, how many opportunities you're creating? Right? So this is a trickier one, but this is what we'd have to get to apply this data-driven management style to other functions. Maybe we can chat about that this afternoon. Okay. And now we've got a nice checkpoint here, 2, 4, 6 months in to check my training interview. And this is by far the biggest predictor of long-term success is the read from the coach and their assessments. And by the way, I didn't talk about that coaching playbook, but that's essentially what you've built up through those monthly reviews. After doing this for 5 months, I never saw a new skill deficiency. Never. They were all covered. And 2 years into the process, when Mary came to me and said, I'm really struggling with sense of urgency development with Jason. Oh, that's, don't worry about it. Bob just addressed that with John 3 months ago. Here's what Bob did. It worked great. By the way, why don't you just grab a cup of coffee with Bob and find out what he did? So we had this beautiful coaching playbook that we built up through this process to create the predictability that we actually wanted. Okay. All right. Data-driven promotions. Come on. Serious? Yeah, we did that. We did that at HubSpot. All right, so here's what it looked like. I was looking at this role of sales, and I was like, really? I'm going to get together with my reps once a year and give them a 3% raise and do an annual review? Like, it's so clear. And I talked to these other companies, like, oh, yeah, we promote people when they've been here for a year and they've done this. I'm like, really? Been here for a year? What does that have to do with anything? Right? When it's so clear the outcome that we want. So this was the promotion path was, hey, listen, you come in as a rep. I made these numbers up just so you know. 40K base, 40K variable with 5,000 options. And then you get promoted to senior sales as a rep, not after a year, not after 18 months. When you do this, bring your customer base to $60,000 of monthly recurring revenue, average more than $5,000 a month of sales of monthly recurring revenue over the last 4 months, and make sure that your contracts lengths are at least 6 months or more. And reps love that. They go after that, and that's a beautiful management style. And then if you do that, great. I'm going to bump your variable pay to 50K. I'll give you another 10,000 options. Right? So I had reps that had been there 6, 7 years that had made it through 6 or 7 tiers. And they're making like 30% more than market, but they deserve it. Like they work at home 3/4 of the time, they take no management, and they bring in 140% of their goal every single month. It's beautiful. I've gotten so many sales candidates from companies like, why are you looking to leave? You've been at the company for 6 years and you've been crushing it. Yeah, well, they doubled my quota and cut my territory in half. So it's time for me to go. Really? That's what you do in sales? Yeah, they all do that. It's like asking your people to leave. My people, when they got a call from a recruiter, the recruiter's like, whoa, you're making that much in inside sales? Sorry, I can't match it. Now, it doesn't mean you keep people around unnecessarily, but as long as they're playing ball, we're creating an opportunity for them to stay. And in terms of termination, I mean, the PIP is very common in sales, and it's very clear. This is what I use from the 0 to 100 million. After 7 months, you've been around for 7 months, and I gave this to the sales hires on their second day of the job. It's not the only thing I covered on the second day, but we did mention it to them. You're here 7 months. If your trailing month quota attainment is 4 months, is below 80%, then you go on a performance plan. You have 2 months to get it above 80%. If you're not, you're fired. If you are, you're off the plan. Okay? It's just no politics. No, I like him, I don't like her. Just cut and dry. And what that did was, it was me and the rep as their manager against the plan. It wasn't the manager against the rep. Right? It wasn't a company against the rep. It was like, everyone's trying to help John out. And if John doesn't do it, he probably shouldn't be here. Right? There's probably a better context for him. Right? So we use that really nicely. And I didn't really cover how to apply that to other jobs. We have to talk about it. So anyway, what are we talking about here? It's a data-driven approach to talent management. Something that the TINYpulse folks, I think, are really building the foundation for. It gives us an opportunity to evolve. I mean, we all want this. We all want our folks to hit their goals. We all want them to get promoted. We want to understand why people leave. And this is really the stuff that drives it. And when we create a data foundation on it, it allows us to have this sort of this test-learn iteration to get better every time. It provides opportunities to hold our hiring managers accountable before these events happen. We've got some leading indicators so we can intervene quickly on the management and we can intervene on the people too. And I think it raises some interesting questions that I'm excited to bat around with you folks. There's something bigger in here. I mean, even just think about compensation. Why do salespeople get comped variably and no one else does? They're just different humans? Like, haven't you seen engineers go into sales? Do they just like change? Or is it maybe the best answer I can come up with is sales' expected result of revenue is highly quantifiable and very close to the high-level performance goal of the company. Fine. That's why they can be variable. But aren't we seeing signs that the way we measure our marketers, our engineers, our other functions, we can quantify close to that as well? And does that provoke new ideas? I think it does. So I think we've scraped the surface. This isn't just a sales application. There's something bigger. And I'm excited to chat more with you folks at the break and this afternoon. Thank you. Do you want to do questions? Okay. Yeah, sure. I know
we got a few minutes until the break, but there are a ton of questions. Cool. So let's just kick it off. So Mark, first, when you talk about coaching, how much of the coaching is driven by the coach versus the coachee?
In my case, it was very much the coach was in charge of driving it all. There were certainly people that wanted more, but I think in our experience, we didn't have any managers that weren't good coaches. So I didn't have a lot of situations where, hey, I'm a rep, I want more than Mary's given me. It just didn't happen. I could see that probably happen elsewhere, but for us, we really honed in on managers that were good coaches, so we didn't have that circumstance. We also, our number one hiring profile being coachable, we didn't have a lot of resistance. We did have some, and the way we fixed it eventually was just let them go on their own, and eventually they came crawling back. But that's kind of an interesting flywheel that you can build, which is if you hire really coachable people and you have a good coaching system, kind of magic sort of happens there. Right? Okay. So it was largely the coach that drove it.
So follow-on question to that, because somebody asked, how did you assess how good a coach someone was?
Really from that paper trail of whether they move the needle on someone, right? So you got the guy Bob there who's struggling with his work lead to demo rate, whether that rate changes. And that's the nice thing about sales was it was all quantifiable, not just the end result, but the mini steps. And if the coach was able to move the needle on that, kudos to you.
I think you clarified this, but when you were talking about the promote versus fire approach, what was the timeline you were working with? What did you think was a long enough period at which you could assess?
For a promotion.
Yeah.
To assess them, that was scary because 3-4 months into a rep's lifespan, a manager would come to me and be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I blew it with hiring Bob. He's not good, he's not gonna make it. And I'd ask a bunch of questions about it, and more than half the time I was like, all right, well, let's let it marinate for a bit. And when we did let it fly and a year later, Bob was our number one rep, it's good, but scary too. Because it's 3 months in, we thought he should be fired. And that happened a lot, which is it's not a good thing, and that's why we've got to look at the leading indicators. The only thing I would look at there was whether or not they were receiving the coaching and moving the needle and staying at a new level. If they either couldn't absorb the coaching or they went up a level, then a week later fell down, that was not a good sign. But as the performance plan said, we waited 7 months before we did that assessment.
Yeah. So earlier you talked about some of the characteristics you looked for in the interviewing process. Yep. 2 questions related to that. First one was, how many characteristics are too many? And then for those that have existing teams, how do you go about sort of not only assessing what those skills should be and then reconciling them against their team?
All right, the first one, I would say, I think 5 to maybe 10 is accessible across a multi-interview process, multiple interviews, et cetera. I do think that there can be a list of secondary stuff that you just kind of have an eye on, and that's how we sort of ran it. I'm not really quite understanding the second one is if they have an existing team, what happens?
How would you? That's a good question. They already archived that question for me. I think the
that
question
one? Maybe it
was
yours.
related to
Okay.
if you have an existing team, how would you go about assessing whether they have the right characteristics?
Yeah, so that's what we were kind of looking at, those coaching diagnoses, was like what's actually happening there, why are they doing well and why aren't they doing well. So I feel like you can, you can get a little bit away from like stuff we looked at in the interview. Like if we were assessing intelligence, that's a pretty abstract word, but I was essentially the double click on that was essentially learning curve. Like when they're presented with new concepts, how quickly can they learn them and then communicate them back to others? That was the key thing. So that was part of the coaching diagnosis. It was like, hey, listen, the person's just struggling with this component. Here's how we're going to go over it. Right? So that's how we would build it in.
And then how did you think about taking your top salespeople who also wanted to continue to grow? And how did you think about, once they hit that top layer, where did you take them next?
Yeah.
And then follow-on question, that is, how did you think about taking salespeople and turning them into managers?
Yeah, almost all my leaders were promoted from within for two reasons. One, we were an early SaaS company running an inside sales model, selling to inbound leads, which really other companies they weren't doing that. And so it was really hard to find talent that could just come in and not do the rep role first. Number two, this data-driven approach was pretty unique, and I kind of preferred to farm people internally. It did become a scale hindrance, so if I were to do it again, I would make sure I built up a muscle of hiring people from the outside too, just so but I put them through a pretty rigorous leadership process before they were actually promoted. They always say don't promote your best rep to manager. You can't promote your worst rep either. So it's kind of like a tricky thing to find. But it's certainly the case that there are plenty of great salespeople who just wouldn't make great managers. They don't want to be manager. And we just kept adding tiers to that promotion thing that I used, and it was worth it.
Awesome. Yeah. Guys, Mark Roberge.
All right, thank you, folks.